How long have you been playing video games?
Most of my life, about since 10 years old.
So you don't really consider yourself an avid player then?
Definitely not.
Okay. When's the last time you've played a video game?
An hour ago.
Do you have any female friends that play games?
Not really, but I tend to steer away from females. They make me weird out a little bit.
Do any of your friends play video games that are women?
Yes, actually.
How many?
Maybe 4 or 5.
Nearly all my friends who are girls play video games.
Oh, really?
I think only like 1 or 2 now.
Oh, so did you meet them they were playing video games, or did you meet them beforehand, before you started playing video games?
Mostly beforehand.
I taught 3 undergraduate classes last semester. One was a general communication and technology course that was required of all communication students. And that one was, I'd say, about 2/3 female. That just kind of reflects the general demographic makeup, I think, of the communication department. The other was critical approaches to communications media, which was about half-half, because that was a required course for media studies students, which I think is a little more gender equal. And then the third was game studies, which had the shockingly high rate of female participation of 6 out of 23 students were female, and that was up from 2 female students the semester before. I think it's still the case, you know, despite my best efforts in pitching the course towards a diversity of backgrounds, cultural and gender backgrounds, that students still associate games as a guy's thing, which of course is one of the things that I want to critically address in the course, is why that's the case. So I think it's been an uphill battle for me and for Chris Campy, who's teaching the course next semester, to try and recruit more women into the course, because we think that's part of the kind of political mission behind the course, is to get more women involved in thinking about playing and making games. So it's mixed progress. I mean, I like to joke at the start of last semester that we saw a 300% increase in the rates of female participation. And then, you know, try to get people to guess how many women that was, and it's like, it's 6. So it's you know, progress, but in short steps.
Can you think of any main characters who are women in video games right now? Any video game? Can you think of any?
Not off the top of my head, but
Which is
if
the
I give it
answer,
some thought.
usually. Yeah.
Why do you think it's so difficult to find video games currently, or even beforehand, that had main characters as women?
Well, I think a big part of it was that previously video gaming was seen as like a very male-dominated industry, right? And so it used to be that, you know, if 95% plus of your players are male, then chances are most of the game developers who used to be players are male, and that's going to make them cater their game towards their audience.
How do you see females portrayed in the game?
Nowadays, females are more portrayed in stronger, more commanding roles. Than
What would
they
an
did.
example of that be?
Like Samus Aran in the Metroid games.
But those are kind of older ones.
They are, but they have come out with new iterations.
Okay. Okay. So do you have any like really new games that haven't been, like those are older ones that started in the beginning? Can you think of any right now that have been made recently?
Right now, that's been made recently.
The past needs resolution. What's past is prologue.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious ones are Metroid with Samus Aran, Lara Croft and Tomb Raider. Some different kind of ones are, there's a game called Beyond Good and Evil, which had a younger kind of teenage, early adult female protagonist with kind of this short, spiky hair. That was actually a photographer, and that's what you did in the game, was you traveled around with your little pet walking and talking owl, or I think it was, basically doing investigative journalism with your camera. What else? There's one recently called Gone Home. It's a first-person game about a young woman who returns to her house, to the home in which she grew up, and it's kind of recounting moments from her childhood through interacting with different objects around her bedroom and around the rest of her parents' home. I mean, there are some horrible examples like X-Blades, in which, you know, the marketing and promotional art showed basically an oversexed whatever from behind, and you just saw her thong. Bayonetta, in which you kind of have a hot librarian that is basically clothed in her own hair. Heavenly Blade, an early release for PlayStation 3, similar kind of oversexed looking character. I think one of my favorite examples is Portal, which is an amazing series, Portal 1, Portal 2, amazing series of environmental puzzle games, wickedly complex and clever puzzle games in which the protagonist just happens to be female. You only see her, it's a first-person shooter game, and so in the first game you only see her her reflection as you walk by a mirror, and it's completely incidental. It's a game in which, for the first time, we are given a female character and it's not made a big deal of. And so that was, for me, a kind of milestone. It's like, look, a female character that isn't, look, we have a female character. But in the second one, they made more of a big deal of it.
Wait. Two archetypes. One is like, oh, male character save me, kind of, and then the strong women, kind of like the sort of Amazon, and who are kind of bland, static characters, who are strong necessarily, like get the thing.
Do you see them as being over-sexualized at all?
Yes.
You do? Okay.
Oh, I see them overly sexualized, and their features are overly exaggerated. Mm-hmm. In a way where it's like not a realistic representation of women.
Can you name a few video games with women main characters?
No.
It's hard, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
The two female characters in the game are basically, one of them is this little devil girl who will kick your ass, and the other one's the cute, nice angel chick.
So semi still
Yeah.
kind of playing gender roles.
A little bit, yeah.
Okay. So in regards, you know, how females are portrayed like that.
I feel that they are getting a stronger role in video games in general nowadays. There hasn't been really any really iconic female video game character other than Samus Aran that I can think of.
So I have been involved in studies in the past where we study players, the way they customize their avatars, and you typically think, oh, you have all these guys choosing to play as women. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that, you know, potentially transgressive or progressive or subversive or risky? But in fact it's not, because what you realize is that they're naming, you know, they're choosing the most sexed up, tarted up avatar, and then calling her, you know, hot date, or calling her, you know, something kind of sexualized. And so a lot of the times, if you take into account not only the type of characters players create, but how they name their characters, and you realize that what seems at the surface to be some really interesting role play is actually very conventional and very stereotypical.
Sure, you have those video games that are very stereotypical in their depictions of women, right? For example, I think the Dead or Alive video games are particularly sexist towards women. In fact, I believe one of their selling points on one of their games was realistic boob physics, just to show how completely ridiculous it is. But there's a lot of video games that are a lot better in their portrayal of women as being like strong, standalone characters.
Well, going off of that, can you name any video games with women main characters?
Yeah, I think you have to look at games like a lot of more like role-playing games have a focus on strong characters to begin with, and then out of that, of course, they have both strong male and female characters. So, for example, Final Fantasy series has numerous main female characters. Same thing with Zelda, or even the Samus games, the Metroid games.
Cheerleaders, Booth Babes, and Halo Hoes was an article that I wrote coming out of my dissertation in the Faculty of Education at York University in Toronto. What I did for that dissertation work was basically, it was an ethnography, video ethnography, where I followed around a group of 20 or so young people, 18, 19, 20 years old, who were playing Halo 3 at the time, competitively, which meant going to these local, national, and then international tournaments, and basically trying to make a name for themselves as competitive Halo 3 players on this increasingly international, increasingly lucrative circuit. And I didn't set out in that work to study gender per se, but what became obvious to me as I went along through this work were the very limited and constrained and stereotypical roles that women were allowed to occupy in this emerging kind of electronic sports or esports industry and community. So yeah, I didn't set out to study gender as a particular part of this research, but it was impossible to ignore, and after a while studying this community and studying the broader scene that they're a part of, you realize that no matter how competent or how economically powerful, in the case of the mother that was flying her son's team all over the United States to take him to tournaments, or how, you know, smart, capable, whatever these women were, they still got shoved into these stereotypes where they were, you know, for in the instance of that one really competent female gamer that I talked to a lot of, she was either going to be portrayed by the community as a Halo hoe, someone that was just there to pick up all the hot guys that attend these tournaments, or she was going to be portrayed as a lesbian because she happens to be really good at games, and that's weird for straight girls to be good at competitive games. So they have to, she in particular had to walk this insane tightrope between being just good enough, or better in most cases than a lot of the boys, but still portraying herself in very feminine kind of ways, lest she be portrayed as sexually devious. And so sexuality and gameplay competence and kind of the meanings around and the histories around sports and esports kind of got mixed up in these really potent ways to position these women as kind of second-class citizens in this community. and so I felt I had to address that.
And have you personally experienced any gender discrimination in the gaming community when you've played online or with friends?
No, I haven't. But I do know of friends who are female that have had that happen to them.
Let's see, I can't think of any times when I was excluded because of my race or gender from video game play. It's just because, I'm the demographic, right? There was a funny time when I was lecturing or giving a guest lecture at what was called the Women in New Media Day at the Toronto International Film Festival building in Toronto before I left. And I was making this argument that a lot of male gamers are essentially douchebags, and I wanted to make a douchebag boot camp where I was jokingly envisioning this kind of boot camp where you unlearn these behaviors, and like that would ever work. I just thought it was a funny term, and people were really warmly receptive of the idea. And I think, shit, if I had been a woman getting up there and telling an audience that we have to kick guys' asses and make them less entitled to these technologies and to these practices, then I would have gotten pelted. And so it made me think of my kind of privilege as a white dude, even being able to talk about this stuff. Because you look at, for instance, what's happened to Anita Sarkeesian. I don't think she would have gotten the same level of vitriol and hate and death threats. She would have still gotten them if she was a guy, but she wouldn't have been nearly to that level of intensity or anger or rage. So I've experienced it, but from the winning side, so to say.
So it's only really recently that women have actually started to be able to get into video games, because there's no longer like this big thing about like, oh, women can't play video games. So you're starting to see, women who play Angry Birds, right? It's a fun little thing on your phone, but it's a video game, so it's kind of like that gateway into it, to it being more accepting. So I think that now, like, there's more women playing, there's more of a real, like, pressure on people who make video games to say, hey, if these are our players, we need to show them that they can have someone they can relate to. And if you're a female and the only main character is male, then they know they're losing that audience. So I think that's kind of what's driving the big change in video games, for sure.
Okay, so I think the issue of women in the gaming industry is a huge one, too big to kind of talk about in a series of little sound bites, but just to kind of start off with a couple of statistics, it's really interesting that we have, 40% of female players are women, and yet only 11% of the people that actually make games are women. And of that 11%, the big chunk is are folks in marketing, human resources, and management. And so I think if it's the case that we know from all cultural production that when you're making media and making art, you make it for people like you, that should give us pause and think, well, no wonder we don't have more women playing. It's because we need more women making. But then how do we get more women into the industry if not enough of them are developing really robust playing careers and really getting interested in games at a young age? So it's kind of this vicious cycle where, on one hand, it's a problem about trying to get women enthused by games enough to want to make them their own. And then it's another problem about, making sure that women actually stay in game production long enough to actually make games. Retention is a huge problem in an industry. What I mean by retention is just making people stay long enough. Is a huge problem in an industry which very typically only offers contract-based positions. Is very often a kind of a hostile, misogynistic locker room environment, hostile to women. Very rarely offers maternity leave or kind of family benefits. Is in constant crunch time, so it makes it very hard to raise children, which typically falls to the role of women, and which, even when women do participate, pays them less. And then you look at how that kind of carries over into video game education, and you see it happening most often in association with engineering programs, which has historically been a very male-dominated discipline. And so kind of from our earliest playing experience up to kind of the opportunities to actually design games at a professional level, you see that the scales are kind of stacked against equitable, meaningful, sustainable female participation. And that means that a lot of stuff has to change in the way that the video game industry operates in order to make it a safer, more accessible, more rewarding place for both women and men to operate and to be.
Although we believe our interviewees and classmates would benefit from the conversations we had with them about women in gaming, we wanted the larger community to become engaged as well. So we became active, setting up a Facebook page and invited all of our friends to join in the progressive conversation. Almost immediately, people began taking our quizzes, watching and commenting on our posts, and even adding to the discussion with their own experiences and videos to share. Some posted videos they thought would be relevant, while others shared instances when they had learned about the objectification of women in gaming. It was surprising to see the reaction and what people had to say about the subject, and we were more than happy to provide them with a medium for them to express it in.